Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a minute, but we've got a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get started with today's webinar. This session will be recorded. We send out all webinars within about 24 hours of the webinar, and if you ever can't find it, you can also go to our blog at runsignup.blog. Usually gets posted there within about 24 hours as well. If you have any questions during today's webinar, you can enter them at any point in the questions module on your GoToWebinar section. It's usually on the right-hand side of your screen. I will be monitoring them throughout the webinar today, although this topic's a little bit different, so I may not have many answers for you. We will try to do a little bit of Q&A at the end if there are questions that are relevant. To quickly introduce today's webinar, if you joined us for webinars before, we usually host a lot of webinars that are really product-based and focus on features that you can use to really activate, build your events, that kind of thing. This one is a little bit different. It's not really an area that we are experts in, so we brought in a customer who has a lot more personal experience and has kind of broached the topic with us before. His name is Porter Bratten. You can see him on your screen now. He's the owner of Orca Running and Evergreen Trail Runs, and he's going to be running the webinar today, kind of sharing his experiences about making his events carbon neutral and providing some guidance to you about how you can get started with the process. But we're really excited to hear from him today, and I hope that you will enjoy this.
Okay, so yeah, like Johanna said, my name is Porter, and I'm going to be talking today about carbon neutral race production. So just talk a little bit about myself first. I love dad jokes because I'm a dad, and I really embrace the cheesy humor. I live in Anacortes, Washington, which is up fairly close to the Canadian border. I have been a runner and a triathlete since 2005, and then in 2010 I started putting on events. I started out with multi-sport and triathlon events, and then kind of gradually transitioned to running only. And so today I am have one company, but we have a couple different brands. We've got Orca Running, which is our road race brand, Evergreen Trail Runs, which is our trail running brand, Blackfish Timing, which is our in-house timing company, also does some timing for other races. Blackfish Crafts, which is our laser award production company or brand. And then most latest is Evergreen Excursions, which is a small guided trail running, like all day long trail running guiding company, basically. So there's about 10 trail races, 14 road races, 3 excursions, and about 15,000 runners annually. And as you can see, we've got, there's our Orca Running logo down here with the carbon neutral version. And oh yeah, I put this in. So at the beginning of all my races, at least the ones that I'm present at, I always tell a dad joke because people love them. I get so much mail and appreciative texts about the dad jokes. And I know that you're all laughing right now. I just can't hear you, but I do appreciate the laughter. So we're going to start with a dad joke. So my wife asked me the other day where I got so much candy. Oh, come on. There's the punchline. I said, I always have a few tricks up my sleeve. There we go. That's here to just lighten the attitude a little bit. And anyways, so that's a freebie. Enjoy the joke. And now on more serious stuff. So why carbon neutral is a good question. Sorry, I just need this little box right here. The first reason, I guess, is for my kids. I know that they'll be around when I'm not, and they will have to deal with the world as it is, and as it will be. Another reason is, as a small business owner, I feel like there is, it's important that I set an example for other businesses and to our runners. As the resident of the United States of America, we're the world's second largest polluter after China, and have a pretty high per capita carbon footprint. I think there's a moral imperative to do it, that it's just the right thing to do. And I think it can be a helpful marketing piece for your races. If somebody's looking at 2 races and one makes a point of being carbon neutral, that may push things in your favor and make them sign up. And the last thing is that it doesn't need to be a super difficult process. Our our industry is such that it can be fairly straightforward. It is a very large topic, and I want to make it clear that I'm not an expert. This is something I've kind of just been researching on my own with help of one of my employees, but it is a whole field, and it's only going to get bigger and more interesting as years go on. So I put a graph here. It's pretty interesting just to show the really large increase in emissions over the last 50 years. Another good reason to do it is that public opinion is changing. Turn off my heater. Majority of Americans are in favor of stricter environmental laws and feel like regulations are worth the cost. And then, as you can see in the graph on the left, a majority of people also feel like it is there is support for protecting the environment and dealing with global climate change. So it's a popular thing to do, and probably even more popular with runners. Okay, so let's talk about what a carbon footprint is. I'm sure it's a term you've heard many times, but there actually is a definition. So it is a measure in metric tons. A metric ton is 2,204 pounds of how much carbon dioxide equivalent is released into the atmosphere. These standards are established by a nonprofit, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And you may have noticed that I said carbon dioxide equivalent. And the reason is because not all gases are created equal. So carbon dioxide is the most common one, so that's why it's kind of the baseline, the equivalent. But different gases can have very different effects on warming the atmosphere. I'm sure some of you have heard about cows and how they fart and burp, and it's methane. And the reason that's kind of a big deal is because methane is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So if you release 1 pound of methane, that's worth that's actually 25 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent. So, and then you can kind of generally categorize those emissions into 3 different scopes. Scope 1 is direct emissions, so that's things like a gasoline engine or a generator. It's pretty obvious what is actually actively releasing gas into the air. Scope 2 is purchased energy, so electricity, purchased energy, excuse me, which is nearly always electricity that you buy through your utility company. And that may come from, depending upon where you live and what kind of setup your utility has, that could be hydroelectric, it could be wind, it could be solar, but most of the time it's going to be some sort of fossil fuel powered power plant. Here in Washington State, we're lucky that the majority of our energy comes from hydroelectricity, from dams, but that's not the case across much of the world. And then scope 3 is for sure is a little more difficult to measure because it's not direct. So these are things like the metals that you buy, the shirts that you buy, travel that you do for races, garbage and waste produced by your race, basically everything else that's associated with your business and its operation. And here's just kind of a visual representation of those 3 things. So scope 1 direct is mostly vehicles. If you have a facility, that as well. Scope 2 is that purchased energy, mostly in the form of electricity, but it could be other things as well. And then scope 3 is kind of everything else. So your garbage, transportation of things, processing, and so forth. So as far as, okay, I see that I have a little bit of duplicate information here. But anyways, your race's carbon footprint is kind of up to you. And that's kind of a good thing, I think, because it can be overwhelming. And so the fact that you get to define what your carbon footprint is, you can start with a more restrictive definition at first. And then as you get more familiar with it and more competent, you can grow to expand. But essentially, you're going to decide what you will and won't consider part of your footprint. You're going to draw a circle around your business, and everything inside the circle is part of your footprint, and outside the circle is not. You can always change it. It's helpful, I think, if the things that are inside the circle are more directly under your control, or is easy for you to get the data for it or the information for it that will allow you to calculate it. So once you've done that, then the goal is to bring the carbon footprint to zero through two ways: reducing it in the first place, and then offsetting it. Before I move on, so hopefully those terms are fairly self-explanatory, but reducing is just what it sounds like. Perhaps it's, instead of having a diesel truck, it's getting an electric truck, for example. Offsetting is, once you've done whatever you can to reduce your carbon footprint, you can then take the remainder, because you're never going to be able to reduce to zero. I don't think it's feasible for hardly any businesses to reduce their carbon footprint to zero. They're going to have to offset some portion of it. So offsetting is essentially purchasing carbon credits on the market to then offset your remaining carbon footprint. So for us, what we decided, myself and one of my employees spent a whole bunch of time last year kind of talking about this, doing research, making decisions. And what we have decided that is our carbon footprint is our staff, employee transportation to and from races, and also to and from meetings and whatnot. Our participant swag, specifically the shirts, our utility energy usage for our staff, our home offices of our staff, because we all work from home. The participant race day transportation, so that's runners getting to and from your race. Mailing and shipping things, whether that's bibs, we do mail out all of our bibs, but if we are mailing out a t-shirt or some other piece of merchandise. Race day generators, so just generators for electricity, and then race day waste, our garbage and recycling. Things that are outside for now is the metal production taking place in China, and participant food, because it's a little more tricky to measure. One note about metal production is that we have, one thing we have done is actually purchase a laser cutter, and we make some of our race swag here, actually in my garage. It's not all of it, but we make all of it for our trail races and about 2 or 3 races a year for our road races. It'd be great to do all of it, but it's a lot of work. My garage is only so big. So here's some things that we are doing to reduce. I will come back in a minute to how we're offsetting, but this is just some things that we are doing that aren't necessarily going to, well, I'll just start talking. So the first thing we did is Trees Not Teas, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. It's a company out of the UK that you work with them, and essentially when a participant registers for a race and you're offering t-shirts, the participant can then choose to instead of a t-shirt, have a tree planted. And it's pretty cool because there's no cost to the runner. They're getting a tree. And then after the race, you, the race organizer, send a database of your participants, not your registrants, your participants, to them, and then they send out an email to the participants, and they get an email that says, "Hey, Joe Schmo, because you opted in for this, here's a picture of a sapling that we planted here at these GPS coordinates. This kind of tree, and it's in here." And so the participant, it's a lot less anonymous and a lot less opaque. They know that there is an actual tree that was planted in an actual place, and that makes a difference. Recycling metals is a real easy thing to do. Most people live probably fairly close to a metal recycling plant, and all you have to do is cut off the ribbon, and then you take the metals to them, and sometimes they'll pay you. It's pretty little, but instead of the metals going in garbage, which of course they're never going to compost or decompose, they're getting recycled. As I mentioned earlier, we make some of our swag, our finisher swag, in the USA in my garage. One thing we're doing is we're incentivizing carpools. What we do is we have a coffee truck that comes to the races, and if somebody carpools, they get a little token that they can then turn into the coffee truck for free coffee. Important to incentivize carpooling because people are a little hesitant to do so. Sorting waste is a slightly more challenging thing to do, but if you can, I know that there have been other, there's been other discussion about that in the Facebook group, but sorting waste is a good thing to do. Recycled shirts. This is kind of a big one for us this year. We are working with Leslie Jordan to do a tri-blend shirt that is where 50% of it is made from polyester, and that polyester is recycled. And I think, anyways, that's something we're doing. As I mentioned earlier, we're offsetting our shipping carbon emissions. There's a company called Cloverly that will essentially, it's an app that plugs into your Shopify store, and everything that gets mailed out, it will automatically calculate based upon the weight and where it's going, what the carbon emissions is for that shipment. So it's a fairly low cost thing. We pay for it, but it's very inexpensive. Cupless racing, that's something we instituted a couple of years ago for all of our races where we just don't have cups. So we purchased some reusable silicone collapsible cups for people that forget theirs, but we've essentially done away with cups. It's worth checking out that if it's an option to work with your utility company to have solar or renewable energy sources for your home office electricity. That's something that I've done with my home since my laser uses a lot of electricity. It makes a lot of sense. And then, make our metal provider wrap our metals in paper, not plastic, or just minimize the amount of plastic. Instead of having them individually wrap every bundle 25. That can cut down on a lot of plastic. Other things that we haven't done yet are kind of on the to-do list is look at what we're serving at the races to avoid foods with a higher carbon footprint, mostly beef, and use locally produced food. Oops. Okay, so offsetting what's left. Okay, I did skip one. So the way that offsets work is a whole big field. Like I said, I am not an expert. I'm just passing along what I've learned so far. But it is a whole world out there. So, okay, I'm actually going to skip ahead because this is kind of a very instructive graph that I just put in. After looking at our footprint, we saw that overwhelmingly the largest component of our carbon emissions was travel to and from the races, which I guess should not be a surprise because if you've got 15,000 people a year driving, we found that people, I think, drive on average 38 miles round trip. That is a lot of cars driving around. So that is our biggest chunk. So as I said at the beginning, it doesn't need to be super complicated because for most races, this is probably going to hold true for you as well, that your biggest chunk of emissions are people driving to and from. And so in some ways that makes it a little straightforward. So let's talk about offsets because people stop to get, unless your race is a virtual race, of course, we're all familiar with now, people are still going to have to drive to and from your races. And electric cars are getting more popular, but they're still a pretty small minority. So how do you offset all those people driving to your race? You buy credits. So it's an open market. That means that prices are very much affected by supply and demand. So they can go up by the day or by the hour. The idea with an offset is that you have prevented or you are preventing a specific amount of carbon dioxide equivalent from being released. There's a large range of projects. Some of them can be real sketchy and some of them can be really great, just like anything else in this world. There are several certifications out there that exist. There are some more reputable companies you can buy an offset through. And then there are ones that are, when I say sketchy, I mean a lack of accountability. And it's kind of like, there's like some dude in a forest and he's like, hey, you see that tree over there? I swear I was going to cut it down. But you had given me 20 bucks, so I'm not going to cut it down. And you have no idea if that dude in the forest is how many people he said that to, was actually going to cut the tree down, and so forth. So that's kind of the worst kind of carbon offset. The best kind of carbon offset is where you are helping to fund a new project, something that is perhaps employing local people, perhaps it's being an economic stimulus for the area, that sort of thing. The market is taking off. Prices have gone up, even just in the last 2 months. Prices went up a fairly large amount, and so we actually bought in advance for all of our 22-20 races. We made an estimate of how many runners we were going to have. We were a little generous in the estimate, and we bought it up front to save money. It cost about $6,500 for 14,000 runners, and that's covering all of our 22 entry races. And the way we paid for it is that we, after a lot of back and forth with RunSignup, we figured out the best way to do it would just be to set up an additional fee in RunSignup. So as I mentioned earlier, we calculated that on average, people are driving 38 miles round trip for the race. And so using some publicly available calculators, we found out, wow, that costs about a little less than $1 to offset that. So we're passing that along for participants. So when they get to the checkout page, they will see your entry fee, the processing fee, the RunSignup processing fee, and then they'll see a 95-cent carbon fee that we get. So it's less than $1. So far, we've had, I don't know, it's February. We've had a few thousand registrations, and I've heard of one person who complained about the $1. And so we're fine. We're okay losing him. But that's basically how we're paying for our offsets for our runners. The company we worked with is called South Pole. They're based in Switzerland, as all fancy companies are. But they have a United States office, and I went back and forth with them quite a bit, and I said that I wanted to do a project in the United States, and so we bought 550 tons of greenhouse gas emissions from the Crow Lake Wind, which is in North Dakota, and very, as you can see, very gorgeous. Employs some people. It's owned by a variety of stakeholders, and it seems like a great project. So I'm not an expert, but okay. So like I said, that participant transportation is the biggest component of it. So how do you figure out what that is? Don't get overwhelmed. It's best to tackle it one small piece at a time, and don't be in a rush. Don't try and get this done all at once. Also, don't be afraid to use estimates, because everything probably will be an estimate. You can choose to err a little more generously or try to be more accurate, but that's my recommendation. You can, if it's in your budget, you can pay for an audit. And I've seen that some big companies like the Chicago Marathon do very comprehensive measuring and auditing of their environmental impact, not just their carbon footprint. The quote that I got was $5,000 to do an audit of our company. And so I said, well, maybe next year we'll do that, but not this year. So you're kind of going to do it yourself. So the best way to start with RunSignup is to get the registration data for where your runners are. And that's going to help you figure out, if you assume they're driving from their house to the race and back, you can use a lot of spreadsheets basically to figure out how far they're driving, and then come up with an average round trip distance per participant. One thing that we did is a participant survey. We didn't get a huge response. I think we got like 100 responses or so. But essentially, we wanted to find out like how many people carpool and how open are people to the idea of carpooling, since that obviously reduces your footprint. So we took that into account, knowing we took our data from our survey on carpooling and kind of took that into account on our estimates for our participant transportation. But it's really helpful if you're friendly with spreadsheets and you love Excel, like I do. Okay, showed this already. Yeah, so just a little bit more. This is a little more. Obviously, we'll get the slides after the presentation, but I think this slide right here is going to be helpful for creating your own spreadsheet that will let you figure out that average round trip time. Just being mindful of time. I don't want to take up too much of y'all's time. Yeah, so again, this is just getting real into the details of how to calculate that. Here's a list of resources that we've used. The top two, Athletes for a Fit Planet and Council for Responsible Sport, are great. Athletes for a Fit Planet is, I think, a little more accessible for a smaller race like ours. Council for Responsible Sport is a very legit, involved certification process that the Chicago Marathon, for example, has an excellent rating from them. So check them out. Check out what the Chicago Marathon is doing. Yep, a few more sources, and that's pretty much it. So, Johanna, were there any questions that came up?
Just a couple which you may or may not have answers to, but we can start with those and see if there's any advice you have. If anyone still has questions, feel free to put them in. And like he said, we will send out that full deck with the follow-up. So anything that he linked or that you want to go back to what organization he was talking about, you will have access to that. This one, you may have an idea. If not, if anyone else has a suggestion, feel free to throw that in the questions and I'll add it in as a suggestion. But if you have any other ideas for how to incentivize carpooling.
Yeah, carpooling is tricky because stranger danger, and I know that a lot of our majority of our participants are female and perhaps feel less comfortable just getting rides. But I think that the biggest thing to do is have a sense of community amongst your races, so that the more that people know other runners at your races, and especially repeat runners, I think people will feel more comfortable seeking out carpools. We have played around in the past with a public Google sheet where people can say, hey, I'm coming from this general area, I am looking for a ride, or I can provide a ride. We just had our first race last weekend with the coffee tokens, so we're going to see how that works. I think that providing a reward, like a very tangible reward, coffee is a great one, for carpooling is important. I've seen another race had coasters. If you carpool, you got a coaster. But I think carpooling is a pretty tough nut to crack. And so I don't think there's any silver bullet for that, for getting people to carpool.
Good ideas. Can you give a little bit more information on trees, not tees? How that works?
Yeah, so the way that it works is you work with trees, not tees. You set up a question in your registration, and it offers participants, basically they have three options. They can get a tee like normal, they can get a tree instead, or they can, if they want both, they can pay for a t-shirt. And after the race, you take the people that actually finished and you send that database to Trees Not Tees, and they invoice you. And essentially what they charge you is whatever you've been paying for a t-shirt. I think they have a minimum. It's pretty low. But you just tell them that, yeah, I've been paying $5.65 for t-shirts, and that's what they charge you per tree. And they've been previously just in the UK, mostly in Scotland, but I know that they're going to have their first projects in the United States this year. I forget, it's going to be in Washington, Oregon, or Montana. I don't know if they picked one yet, but they are buying land, and they actually use those trees then for carbon offsets. They sell the carbon credits from planting those trees to other organizations, because it turns out that the cost to plant a tree is a lot more than $5. So they're not making money on this service. They make money selling the carbon credit to third parties. Hopefully that answers your question.
I don't know if you know this yet, because I don't know how long this has been implemented, but someone followed up with that on how popular have you seen trees be as an option when given to your runners?
Pretty popular. Our next road race, which is the 5th of March, is over 10% of people selected a tree. I want to say it was 13%. But I checked a little while ago about, kind of across the board, and all of the races were between 8 to 13% of opt-in for the tree.
Couple questions on cups at races and either using compostable cups or no cups, what your transition was like for people getting used to that.
Yeah, we dragged our feet on the cupless thing for a while because we were all anticipating that people would just form an unruly mob and storm the race with pitchforks if we got away with cups. But people were like, okay, it was really a non-event. So compostable cups are great. It's important that if you use any sort of product that is labeled as compostable, that's not like a banana peel, where it's a product that's manufactured, it's important that you check what it's actually made of, and then you verify that whatever composting facility it's going to after your race, that they can handle those. Because there's a lot of cups made of PLA, which is made from corn, and only some, if that is only compostable in a certain type of industrial composting facility where it's kind of warm, pretty hot actually. And not all composting facilities, like the one where I live, cannot do PLA, but the one down in Seattle can. So compostable cups can be good as long as you make sure that they're actually getting composted. So what we ended up doing is we make it very clear on the website and the registration process is cupless. You bring your own cup. In the pre-race email, we reinforce that no cups. We do keep a stash of like 50 cups at every aid station just in case somebody you want to have some cups in case it's very hot, for example. But then what we've done is every year we buy, a couple hundred. I think more than a couple hundred, probably like 1,000 a year of these silicone cups. And for people that don't bring something to the race, which the vast majority do, and I think as we've been putting on more, we see fewer and fewer people forgetting them. But anyways, if they forget one, it's just this wish I had one. It's soft enough you can basically just shove it in your waistband of your pants or shorts, and then you whip it out at the aid station, and you get your water and you drink, and you're on your way. And even I really expected to get a lot of pushback from the speedy folks, be like, PR cups, but I think we've had one or two complaints about it, but it's been pretty minimal.
Awesome. Follow up on that. Were you selling the silicone cups if they didn't have the regular cup? Or were you
No, we give them away. They're fairly inexpensive to buy. They're, I think, around $1 each if you buy them in bulk. If you buy them in the United States from a third party, they'll be a lot more money. But if you buy them, we buy them on Alibaba, and the exact same product as what you're buying from Solomon or whatever, and it's fraction of the cost. So.
Two more questions for now. Do you do anything with recycled bibs or recycled RFID chips?
Yeah, Tyvek, you can recycle Tyvek. That is on our list. Waste sorting for us has been one of the more challenging things to do because the issue with waste sorting is that if you can't have cross contamination. So if you it's pretty stringent recycling and composting standards. So if you have a bunch of banana peels in your recycling or whatever, you can't recycle that. So you either have to like dig through the recycling and pull those things out, or just not recycle all of it. So it's important that I think it's better to start with a smaller scope of waste sorting and expand outwards rather than trying to bite off all of it at once. So yeah, so we've started doing it at our races, not all of them, and not trying to recycle everything. But you can recycle Tyvek, you can recycle plastic wrappers like goo wrappers. You can recycle those. At least in Seattle, there's a facility that takes them. But the challenge of getting all of those to the right spot is that's on our list to do, but we haven't implemented it yet because I think the athlete communication and the awareness is the hardest part. That like there's so many things you're trying to tell the runners for race day, where it is, what time, all these things, and so getting that across the board. And when they're across the finish line, they're like, "What? I did what?" Getting that off them is not super easy, I think. So, yeah. I haven't looked into RFID chip recycling. I don't know.
The last one on here, I'm not sure you're going to have the data to be able to answer this right now, and particularly given the kind of chaos of the last couple of years. But I do think it's a good point, anyways, based on like how you can use this to market your event as well. Have you seen your race participants skew younger at all since rolling out the carbon footprint reduction tactics? I'd imagine it would resonate with younger runners like Gen Z and millennials that we are doing a bad job of drawing in.
Gen Z, yeah, and millennials. TikTok. I haven't. No, I mean it's kind of too early to say, I guess. I do know that runners are trending older, and that those young folks are not signing up for races the way we'd like to. So my hope is that it does make a difference, though, because I think it is far more of an issue for younger people than older folks. So yeah.
I think that is all of our questions. Thank you guys for joining us today, and thank you so much, Porter. I think this was really useful content, and we will get it all up on our blog so you guys can refer back to any of the links shared here.
Yeah, and if anybody has any questions, I don't know if I can, if you're able to include my email address in the post.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah,
Yep,
feel free to.
I'll link that. Awesome. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody, and enjoy the dad jokes.